Hello and welcome to this pricing masterclass. The reason I'm doing this is because it's the biggest question that I get asked from electricians, and I think it's probably the thing that I've struggled with the most over the years is how much should you charge as an electrician? And there's a huge mistake that a lot of people make when it comes to pricing their work and running their business in general. So I'm going to share that mistake with you in this webinar, and we're going to go through some of the big lessons that I've learned over the years about how to price things properly and how to price to make a profit, because that is probably the number one mistake that a lot of people make is they run their business like a charity. Basically, what do I mean? Well, not for profit. What they do is they work out how much they need to earn, to take home at the end of the day, and then that's how much they charge the customer. But what they forget is all of the other things that go in to running a business and the profit element, which is so important if you want to run a scalable business. So what I've done in this for this webinar, I've created a little bit of a pricing calculator in Excel. It's very basic, but hopefully it will kind of illustrate the point to you guys, and we can kind of play around with it and talk about some of the things that are important to factor in when it comes to pricing. So I'm going to share my screen and just jump straight into this. So here we go. So hopefully you can see that. Now, on the left here, we've got our direct costs. So this is your labor, whether it's, how much you pay your electricians per hour, or how much you want to pay yourself per hour if you're just a one-man band, shall we say. Then obviously you've got materials, which are going to vary based on the job. So for the sake of this pricing calculator, we're going to just stick with the labor element of things for the moment, because the materials are kind of easy to figure out, and we'll talk about how I price materials later on. But the most important, the hardest to figure out is how much to charge for labor, right? So this is what a lot of people do. They go, right, well, I want to earn 30 quid an hour, so I'm going to charge 30 quid an hour to the customer. And then they wonder why at the end of every month they can't pay themselves that much. But it's because of all this, right? Overheads, or what we'd call indirect costs. Now, I've just roughly listed out some of the main things that my business has. These are not accurate costs, by the way. My business overheads are way more than that. But this is a very simple calculator to work out what your annual overhead is. And it's really important to do it annually, not monthly, because things can vary, right? For example, your accountant, if you're a limited company, you're probably going to pay them once a year. You might, they might be on a payment plan where you pay them monthly, but overall it's sort of an annual charge. You got things like bank charges. For us, I think we're with Santander or something, it costs us 15 quid a month to have the bank account. So stuff like that adds up. Maybe you take credit card payments as well. You've got to factor those kind of things in. Insurance, that's a big one for us as electricians or any trades. You might spend several £1,000s a year for all your public liability, employer's liability, legal protection, all of that lovely stuff. If you're doing tools and van insurance as well, if you're doing solar, you need more insurance. It costs a lot. Software, another big one. You might be using something that's fairly reasonably priced like Tradeify, or you might be on something a bit more expensive like SimPro. But either way, you're going to spend a lot on software every year if you want to streamline your business processes. Legal fees, you might need to get contracts written up for employees, things like that. You might have various legal fees that you have to pay throughout the year. That's something you've got to think about. Marketing is a big one. Unless you're like us, where you've spent years building a YouTube channel that gives you most of your leads, then you're going to have to spend a fair chunk on marketing to get leads flowing in. I know businesses who spend 5,000-10,000 a month just on Google ads and things like that. So, that's something to think about. For the purposes of this webinar, I think we're going to think, like a small business, because that's where most of us start off. Maybe it's us by ourselves. Maybe it's us and one or two extras, like an apprentice, or maybe, us and another electrician. But we're kind of going to think from that small level, and then we can kind of scale up from there. So you might have rent, you might have a premises to factor in, you might have a telephone system that you've got to think about and how much that costs. Training, always good to budget a certain amount of money every year for training. Uniform, if that costs, if you've got a team, you want to make everyone look smart, that costs something. Or just getting your work trousers and your boots and all of that stuff, that costs. Fuel, vehicles, whether you lease a van or you buy a van, you really need to divide. Even if you buy a van, you've got to think, okay, how much is the van costing me to buy? How long am I going to keep it for? And how much will it be worth, do I think, when I sell it? And then you take that sort of depreciation cost, divide it by the number of years that you're going to have the van for. If you're going to lose 10 grand on the van from when you bought it to 5 years later, you divide that 10 grand by 5 years. It's going to cost you 2 grand a year, basically, for your van, plus your fuel, which is a little bit, it kind of comes into direct costs, but I think it's easier to just put it into overheads and just average it out. Waste, if you're going to have, you need to get skips, or if you've got an office where you've got, materials and waste that you've got to get rid of, something to factor in. Tools, whether you're buying or you're using like Hilti sort of fleet management and you're paying monthly for your tools, you're still going to have to factor in the cost of those tools and replacement cost, a little bit like you do with your van. If you're going to need to get a new drill every 2 or 3 years, or if it's a Makita, then probably every 6 months, then you're going to need to factor in the cost of replacing that regularly, and think about how much that is going to cost you. And then you've got stuff like certifications. Mark was just saying about he's going to go through his MCS approval. That costs. You got your NIC or your NAPIT or whatever it might be. All of that stuff costs a lot every year to kind of run the business. And this is all overheads, right? Which basically all of this stuff, you have to pay for this stuff even before you get your tools out and do a job, right? All of this stuff is kind of, you need to pay it whether you're busy or not. So this is your kind of basic indirect costs of running your business, your overheads. Now I've kept it quite simple, but there might be other stuff that you think you would include there for your business. For me, I break some of these down further. So marketing, I'll break it down into different categories so that I can actually track exactly how much I spend on marketing in all the different platforms and stuff. But it's just kind of a simple example. So if we put all of these at 0, what happens is the total goes to 0. You can fill all of this out, and then it will add up your total, which is your annual overhead for running your business, basically. Then what you've got to do is work out your hourly breakdown, right? And what I mean by that is, okay, how many working hours are there in the year? So how many electricians have you got? So if it's just you, you'd put 1. How many hours are there in a day? Well, most of us probably count an 8-hour day as like a normal working day. How many days are there in a year? Well, 52 weeks in a year, 5 days a week. That works out at 260 days if you're not taking a single week off. If you're employing people, you've got to factor in holiday into that and stuff, but we'll talk about that here. So that gives you 2,080 possible hours that you can work and get paid in a year. And then if you say, okay, 40% downtime, it's probably a reasonable figure to account for holidays, to account for days when you're not able to charge full 8 hours because you may be just jobbing and you charge an hour here and then another hour there and stuff like that. 40% might be high for you or low for you. You've got to work that out. But if we count 40%, that gives you 1,248 chargeable hours in a year. Now, if you've got 3 electricians, then obviously you've got more chargeable hours, etc. But probably your overheads are also going to be higher. So, this calculator will just vary based on that. But then what that does is that allows you to go, right, my cost per hour, just purely overhead for running my business, is £47.23 based on this. You know, if my annual overheads are 58 grand, before I get my tools out, I need to pay £47.23 an hour just to run my business. Now, you've not factored in this yet, right? So what I need to do, I've sort of been building this on the fly. So what we'll do is we'll put labor in here, 30, and then we're going to add these two up, basically. So we're going to add another line in here. The wizard that I am with Excel is going to go sum these up. Boom. £77.23 an hour is what it costs you to run your business, including paying yourself £30 an hour or paying your employee £30 an hour, right? So then really what you want to do is add, say, a 20% profit margin on top of that, which means that your business actually makes a profit and you're not running it like a charity. You're actually going to build up some cash on the sidelines, which then you can use in the future to invest in growing your business or have a bit of a war chest in case, you know, things go quiet. I say it's always good to try and have 6 months worth of expenses just in savings sitting on the side, so that if you get a quiet patch or, you know, something bad happens, you've got that money aside to kind of protect yourself. So this is just a really rough idea, but can you see the difference, right? From 30 quid an hour, which is what people are thinking in their head, I need to charge 30 quid an hour because that's how much I want to earn, to actually you need to be charging £92.67 an hour when you factor in all of these overheads, which I think are fairly reasonable for, you know, for a one-man band. Okay, maybe you don't have a premises, so if we knock that on the head, what else can we knock on the head? I mean, I think all of these are pretty reasonable. Like if you've got a van, 400 quid a month on a lease, that's about right. You know, you might spend a bit less on waste. Tools is probably about right. Certifications is probably about right. Software might be a bit less if you're using Tradeify or something. Maybe it's going to be about that. But even so, like you need to be charging at least 70 quid an hour to basically take home 30 quid an hour. Now, obviously, it's interesting because when you scale up, you know, if I take on 3 electricians, obviously my overheads are going to go up a bit, but they're not going to like triple. So actually, the more people you start to hire in future, as long as your overheads don't double every time you take on a new staff member, you can actually end up reducing your cost per hour, and therefore you can either charge less, you know, and be more affordable, or you can make more profit essentially. Now, you know, I think for my business, the overheads are probably about £250,000. So yeah, we've got sort of like 3 or say 4 people on the tools. You know, this works out about right. So, you know, it's interesting. Now we're charging £100 an hour plus VAT at the moment. We were charging £93.75 and we put it up a few months ago. And it's working out well. Like the calculations actually work out well, that, you know, we're making a 20% profit margin more or less. So, you know, this does work and it's quite simple to do. Now, with materials, that's the other thing that you've got to think about is materials. Do you charge cost price or do you mark up your materials? Now, a lot of people, I've heard this like, oh, no, that's a bit cheeky. You can't mark up your materials, right? But the thing is, like, it costs you a lot of time and energy to actually source your materials to work. You know, how much time do you spend in the evenings and on the weekends, which is not included in this 8 hours a day that you're billing out? How much of that time do you spend trying to source materials, getting prices from suppliers, building out quotes? And if you're not doing that yourself, you're paying somebody else to do it, right? So that's all adding to your overheads. Now I've not put any admin fees in here, right? So if this is just for you as a one-man band, if you're running a business with all the things that you need to pay for usually. But if we add in here a couple of admin staff to do the quotes, or maybe like an estimator or something like that, or a salesperson, they all go into your overheads, because you're not getting paid per hour for their time. So that really starts to rack up your overheads, and that's where marking up your materials can make a big difference. So for example, charging, if you're doing a job, maybe it's an EV charger job or something, you charge £1,000, like the materials cost you £1,000. If you are not marking up your materials, then all of the time that you spent building that quote, sourcing those materials, on the phone with a wholesaler, arranging deliveries, all of that stuff, it's basically lost time. You're not getting paid for it. But if you mark up your materials by however much, say 30%, right? Then, 3,000%, that'd be nice. Then suddenly you start to make money on your materials as well, which, you're not ripping anyone off. You're just getting paid for your time to actually source all of these materials and offer the warranty and all of the other stuff that you do as part of providing those materials. So, if we take that and then we times that by this, you get, say, a £300 profit off of those materials, which then helps, it goes to your bottom line at the end of the day, or it helps you to cover some of these overheads. So that's something that you absolutely should be thinking about, is if you're not marking up your materials yet, definitely do. And at the end of the day as well, when you're sourcing the materials, usually you're getting them from a wholesaler, you're getting them at trade price, right? Which is cheaper than what the customer could. I know in the days of now, with the days of Amazon and stuff like that, sometimes if people want to find stuff online, they can probably find it cheaper than the wholesaler. But ultimately, you're providing a service, you're procuring materials for the customer, that is a service that you need to be sort of charging for by way of markup. That's my personal opinion anyway. And since going back in the history of my business, I didn't used to mark up materials. I used to do labor, which I was like, my labor's pretty expensive, so I won't charge any markup on materials. That was my reasoning in my head. But that was before I'd figured out all of this stuff. And I was thinking, I'm charging £60 an hour, so I'm sure there's enough money in there for me to end up with what I need at the end of the day. And there just wasn't. As soon as I started to put markup on the materials, it changed everything. And it also then means that as you scale up, you take on bigger jobs, you make more money as well, right? Which kind of encourages you to do more, go bigger, and focus on the the higher margin jobs. So that's just a little overview of a kind of a rough pricing calculator. I can make this available on school if you guys would find it useful. I'll try and polish it up a little bit, because it's just a little bit rough and ready. As I say, I've just sort of built that out just now on the fly. But what I want to show you guys now as well is the kind of how to do this in a software. So I'm going to go into our quoting software. I'm just going to basically create a quote. For Mr. Geldof. Just going to do this now before I share my screen. Right. Okay, I'm going to share this screen. Okay, so this is Bob's house. This is SimPro, by the way, which is what we use at the moment for our quoting. Like, One thing I will say is there's no perfect job management software out there. Like, we used to use Traderify. It's great for a lot of stuff, but it didn't give us the overhead element that we needed. So we use Simpro now. It's very complicated though. I'd say it's only worth using if you're trying to scale up to sort of 10 plus people, because it's just, yeah, there's a lot more elements to it. But basically in here, I can put my customer details. We've got cost centers in here. So let's say we're going to do an EV charging point for him, right? And we're going to go in, and this is where I write the description of my quote and the notes. I've got like scripts. So let's say we're going to do a hypervolt EV charger. Pop the script in for that, and we'll just change like the color and the description of how the cable's going to be clipped and where the circuit's going to go, etc. But this is the important part, is in here, right? So this is the bit where we put our materials and labor, etc. Now, using job management software will save you time. If you're not using something like this, like I'll show you in Traderify as well in a bit, it saves so much time, because I can just build templates for quotes that I do a lot. So I've got a quote here, template for hypervolt. I'll pop that in here. And then I've got all the different variations, the hypervolt, the 5 meter, 7.5 meter, 10 meter cable with the different colors. So I can just go, okay, he wants a 5 meter space gray. So I'll just get rid of all the other ones here. Remove that, boom. So I got the 5 meter space gray. Now that's my cost price with a 30% markup. This is how much I sell it for, right? And then you can add, you know, bits like the 5-year warranty, the EV tower, stuff like that. I can go in here and I create like a package for the materials that might be needed in there. So I've got my EV Ultra cable, so I'm going to use 6mm EV Ultra. I'm going to use 20 meters of that, non-SWA, and I'm going to use 2 packs of clips. That's all I really need for that. So then that works out my cost and my markup. Then there's going to need to be a breaker. I always add sundries just to cover you know, screws, plugs, Hoover bags, you know, all of that stuff. So you might stick 20 quid of sundries on every job, or 50 quid of sundries, whatever it might be, just to cover all of those little bits and pieces that you might use. And then in here, this is where my labor goes, right? So the good thing about Simpro is that it allows me to put my cost rate for my labor. So that cost rate is basically how much it costs me per electrician, including all of the overheads that are associated when I've done, like in the spreadsheet, when I've done all my, you know, overhead costs for the year, I've divided it by the number of billable hours, etc. That's my cost rate. I make a 30% markup on the labor if we sell it at £100 an hour, and then I'll put it for 8 hours, for example. So it's 800 quid a day for the labor. And basically here, then we've got our materials that we need for the job, including the markup. We've got our subtotal, and I can see, which is really nice, I can see the labor cost, the labor markup. I can see materials cost and materials markup. Then you've got the VAT and the total cost of the job. If I go here to the details page, I can actually see at the bottom that I've got gross margin of 41% and net margin of 23%. So I'm going to make 500 quid of net profit off of this job, which is great because I know my numbers. In the past, I've been running blind and not knowing whether I'm making a profit or not on every job. And the thing about this now is I know that if the guys take 10 hours instead of 8, because I didn't quote it properly and it took longer than we expected, that is going to go down, you know. Or maybe they get there and they go, oh, you know what, we need 25 meters of cable or 30 meters of cable. Then those costs are all going to change, and I'm going to, you know, we're going to make less profit at the end of the day. But because I've got it all on a system like this, I can track this. We can associate costs against the job. So when the invoices come in from the wholesalers, we can associate them to this job. When the guys get to site, they start their time on their timesheets. They stop their time when they finish. I know exactly how many hours we spent on this job, and I can do a cost analysis at the end of each job to see, did we make a profit? Did we make a loss? If we made a profit, how much? If we made a loss, how much? And then we can learn from it, because that's the whole thing. You need the data in order to learn from it. So this is just a really rough example, but it gives you a kind of overview of a sort of bulletproof way to actually make sure that you're charging enough and earning a profit, rather than just breaking even or just paying yourself a wage, really. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Now in Tradeify, you can do the same, right? So very, very similar in Tradeify. It's just a little bit more simple. I actually like the user interface of Tradeify a lot more than SimPro, because I just think it's a lot more user friendly. But for example, you can do document themes. So we've got one for EV charger installation, and then you can do kits. So, you know, I can put in a kit for an EV charger. Here we go. There's a kit for Anderson A2, and then in that kit, I think it's got the charger, but it's also got all of the other bits and pieces that are associated with it. And you can see your gross profit in Tradeify, but you can't see the net profit, unfortunately, which is why I kind of was struggling a little bit with Tradeify. But if you're a one-man band, you know, or a smaller operation, then at least having that gross profit figure is really important. And you can set your hourly rates in your settings to include your overheads. So as long as you know what is your break-even figure in terms of like what we showed you in the price calculator, if you know that it costs £59.36 per hour for every hour that you work to actually run your business, then put that you know, as your cost figure for your labor. I think it's in settings. Yeah, you've got all your billing rates here basically. So you can set your, you know, approved electrician rate, and I think, yeah, here we go. This is where you put your cost in. So, you know, if it costs you 59 including your overheads, put that. Don't just put how much you pay yourself. And then that means that your gross profit figure will actually kind of reflect what's your net profit figure essentially after your overheads. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of give you guys an overview of some of the learnings that I've had over the years when it comes to pricing. It's taken me quite a long time to get here, really. And, you know, part of that was like going through a really difficult period where we were like, we're slogging our guts off here and we're charging a decent amount, but we're not making any profit. What's going on, you know? And it was just because I wasn't really factoring in all of my overheads properly. I wasn't marking things up enough in terms of the materials, and I just wasn't tracking things. So, you know, I wasn't really able to see where the money was going and why we weren't making a profit. And I've worked really hard to kind of get it all ironed out now so that we've got a really transparent overview of things, and then we can scale up from here, right? Because if you're losing money every hour that you work, the more you work, the more money you lose. So you've got to know that you're making a profit every hour that you work, because then you can scale up and, you know, take more people on or whatever, and know that you'll make more money, not less. So yeah, that's a little overview. Any questions from you guys?